You are in for an interesting ride.
Have you ever wondered about the psychology of UFO conspiracies? Dr. Leo Sprinkle was a professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming in the 1970s. He did research into explaining who UFO spotters are. Sprinkle took a rare path into psychology. He studied parapsychology, the study of extrasensory perception, and precognitive dreams. Sprinkle worked with other scientists to untangle whether UFOs are from outer space or if UFO spotters are simply witnessing some natural phenomenon. Hello and welcome to another Ammach Project Archive presentation. This is the Ammach in America series, and this episode is with the wonderful, compassionate, very erudite and articulate Dr. Leo Sprinkle. Dr. Sprinkle spent many years, not only is he a contactee, but he is also a researcher, psychologist, and just the most wonderful human being who spent a lot of his time researching what it meant to be a contactee, an abductee, and what information that brought to the table. Sadly, we lost Dr. Leo Sprinkle to the other dimensions on the 15th of November 2021. Is that there are quite a lot of people moving dimensions at the moment, for me personally and also professionally as Dr. Leo Sprinkle. I hope you enjoy this Ammach Files project presentation. Dr. Leo Sprinkle, enjoy. Hello and welcome to the International UFO Conference, the 22nd of its kind, and we're here with Dr. Leo Sprinkle. Without further ado, we've just had a talk from Dr. Sprinkle and we're going to hear a little bit about his history and how he's come to be involved with the UFOs and abductees. Welcome, Dr. Sprinkle, and I know you've had nigh on 50 years of experience as a psychologist.
Yes.
And I would love, just before we get started on that side, how you yourself came to be involved or interested in the UFO aspect and the abductees.
Yes, it's been a long journey and a delightful one at times, rough at other times. Both personal and professional interests are part of my history, just like most researchers. I had childhood experiences. As a college student at the University of Colorado in 1949, I had a sighting of a flying saucer. My buddy and I talked about it, but we didn't talk with other people because it was a kind of a taboo topic in those days. In 1956, my wife and I, coming back from Denver to Boulder, Colorado, we had a sighting of a strange object or light. I knew afterwards, when there wasn't much information publicly, that I had to study the subject and felt it was part of my personal task. I knew it was a good idea to get a doctorate because then I'd only be considered eccentric instead of weird or crazy. So when I finished the doctoral studies at the University of Missouri in 1961, I enrolled in a couple of organizations, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena and APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in Tucson, Arizona. I was at the University of North Dakota and I conducted surveys of people who were interested in flying saucer reports. Tried to do a study with my colleagues, which didn't go, it failed. So I said, okay, I'll do a survey of people who are the experts, people who've been on board a craft.
Can I just ask you, before we go down that road, what sort of attitude did your colleagues have to you about this, about the suggestion of doing a research project?
Well, it was mixed. There were some people who were supportive. There were some people who were negative. Most people didn't care. They had their own activities to do. So the main question over the years has been not so much with my colleagues as with the administration. the Vice President of Student Affairs, who thought that my interests in reincarnation and UFO research were personal research, not professional.
So they didn't see it as a valid academic area of research?
Yes, and so I was told face-to-face and in writing, no more reincarnation research, no more UFO research during office hours, because I was a professor, which meant I could study whatever I wanted to study.
Yes.
But I was also a staff psychologist, which meant I was there 9 to 5. So I do the other work, my personal research, on weekends.
Okay, and where were you based?
At the University of Wyoming between 1964 and then I left in 1989. So I had 25 years at the university, and now 23 years later, I'm still doing the same research.
Can you tell us a little bit about your own early experiences as a child? I'm not sure if you had a sort of contact, face-to-face contact, or...
At first I didn't know. When I was 5 years old, I had nosebleeds, I had nightmares. As I got to be a college student in psychology, I said, well, you know, that could be psychological. But then, when I was 10 years old, I had a strange experience looking at a book where there was a photograph of a galaxy, and in the book the stars were moving, and I couldn't figure out how that happened. Finally, after many years of research and becoming a hypnotherapist and working with people, helping them learn more about their memories, whether it was childhood memories or UFO contacts or past life, when I was 50 years old, in 1980, I decided to become courageous and learn more about my own. So I went to another psychologist. He gave me suggestion to go back to the age 10, where I was so puzzled. I pictured myself on a craft with a large window looking out at the night sky with stars were moving, that same old movement that I had when I was 10 years old. Tall guy on my left, his hand on my shoulder, and he was saying to me, Leo, learn to read and write well. When you grow up, you can help other people learn more about their purpose in life. Well, for 10 years, I struggled with that. Is it a fantasy? Is it a daydream? In 1990, we had another UFO conference. We called them the Rocky Mountain UFO Conference at the University of Wyoming. Every year for 20 years, between 1980 and 2000, 150 or 200 people would gather and talk about their experiences. We started what we called a closed session, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. They call it the open mic. Here it's called the Experiencers Session, where people talk in a small group, or here it's a large group, about their personal experiences. And so in 1990, when a woman was talking about her experience with ETs and the spacesuits that come down into the feet like a kid's pajamas, I started to sob in front of 200 people. One woman in the back said, good, Leo's suffering like the rest of us. Well, my sobbing was not so much pain as it was relief. I said to myself, okay, I know that as a kid I was on board a craft. I know that I was talking with ET. Other people don't necessarily have to believe if they don't want to, but I know it. So it was confirmation to me that I'm both an experiencer as well as a researcher, and it's okay. Keep on keeping on.
Yes, and how did this impact your family life or your wife's feelings about what you're involved with? Was there anything that she had to say about this?
Oh, she's been very supportive. She's a beautiful person, body, mind, and soul. And she knew about ESP, about UFOs, about reincarnation long before I did. I had to go study it, but she knows. She's intuitive. Brighter than I am. When I was a graduate student at the University of Colorado, I looked at the cards showing the academic scores of students. I saw her scores, I saw my scores. She's brighter than I am. So I keep that in mind. Well, the fact that she and I had a sighting in 1956 together was important to me because we have been supportive of one another. She's been very helpful, not only in raising 3 sons and a daughter. Now we have 7 grandkids and beautiful families. But also she was helpful every year, being a hostess for people like Whitley Strieber and others who came to our conference over the years. And so she's been very supportive of me personally and she's been willing to tolerate the nonsense that goes on in other areas of being a professor's wife.
Of course. And what about your children and grandkids? Have they had their own experiences, or has it been just yourself and your wife?
It's hard to know. Sometimes the children talked about experiences. Sometimes they said, "What's that?" When I had a little UFO detector, and one said, "There's no such thing as UFOs."
Okay.
Later on, they were very accepting, and I suspect they've had some kinds of contacts, or like in our daughter, she's now 46, our oldest son is 55. I tell Marilyn, I said, "How can your children be 55, 52, 49, and 46, and you're still 39? She doesn't know how that happened.
No, that's a conundrum. That always is.
But they've been very good in terms of their own intuition and their own acceptance. They put up with ridicule at school when they were little kids,
Right.
but they got beyond it, and now they are, if not enthusiastic about their old man, well, at least they're supportive of their old man.
You were chatting to us earlier on about a point of view that you had about the experience that people have with the ETs, with their various, all the different gamut that it goes across, and the trauma. And perhaps you could just talk about the mirror element, which I found interesting.
Yeah, early on the game was played between skeptics and believers. Flying saucers exist, no, flying saucers do not exist. Well, later we found out some of the skeptics were debunkers. They weren't skeptical, they weren't doubtful. They knew there was no such thing as flying saucers. Later on, the believers also became knowers. They knew because they had been there. So then the game changed as to what the purpose is. Are they invaders? Are they intruders? Are they instructors? Are they initiators? So the two scenarios that have been around for a long time, one scenario is they're good guys and they're bad guys. They're good extraterrestrials, they're bad extraterrestrials, and we're developing weapons on the Earth to work with the good ETs to fight the bad ETs. Well, there's another scenario which I find appealing. It's a good cop, bad cop scenario. This scenario would suggest that we humans, especially us men, we are polluting the planet. We're suppressing women and children. We're building bombs to take out into space, so that ETs looking down at us and say, "Look, there's a neighborhood of gun dealers and drug runners." So we infiltrate and we say, "Hey, you want some extra technology? Give us some abductees." See? So now this scenario would suggest that people are being traumatized by bad ETs to find out about human emotions and sexuality and so forth. Or it would be that the introduction of the good cop, bad cop overturns the patriarchal system on our planet, and then we become peaceful and we don't need war, and we have technology for energy that doesn't need oil and gas and fuel. And so that scenario would suggest that when disclosure happens, and maybe it'll happen this year, disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence will also be disclosure of the energy technology.
Oh, that's critical, I think.
That would allow every man, woman, and child to have food, shelter, clothing, education, and medical. One of my friends said, when I told him that, he said, "Leo, is that socialism or communism?" I said, "Or Christianity?" And he said, "Oh." So this scenario would suggest that a possibility of our becoming a peaceful planet.
If that's the case, where does that leave these experiences then that are, seem to be going into a hybridization process, seem to be still experimenting with people and their emotions? How does that fit in to your scenario?
If it's the scenario of the ETs studying us to find out about our emotions, our sexuality, our reproduction, how we react to hybrids and so forth, then you'd say, well, they're taking a long time to learn because they're
Yes.
they're sharp enough. They should have caught on after a few years. But another scenario is looking at a school and a person would go away and come back and say, "You mean they're still teaching first grade and sixth grade and 10th grade at that school?" Yeah, because there are new kids coming in. So the mirror effect would suggest that instead of looking at UFOs and ETs and we're finding out about them, the mirror would say we're finding out about ourselves. What are we doing about our emotions? What are we doing about our children? What are we doing about our planet? The mirror effect would suggest that they are presenting themselves so that we learn about ourselves. If we come to recognize that we can become peaceful instead of violent, that we can be careful in terms of how many people we reproduce on the planet, then maybe we will come to recognition that we're studying ourselves.
Okay, so how does that again tie in? There must be millions of hybrids from research that I've gleaned that have been produced so far. So I wonder, how do you think those beings that are hybrids now fit in with that view of...
Well, one scenario would be Plan B. Plan A would be to keep the Earth intact and to help humanity grow up so it becomes planetary and extraplanetary. Plan B could be hybrid children take over the planet if we destroy ourselves on the planet with nuclear bombs. Another possibility could be people saying, okay, this is a good place to have babies, extraterrestrial and terrestrial. We're all extraterrestrial. One person said to me, "Leo, I've never seen an ET." I said, "Yes, you have." He said, "No, I haven't." I said, "Look in the mirror." We're all ETs. We all came from another planet. It may have been a long time ago, but it all happened. So another possibility is that this is a breeding ground for other planets, new planets. What I would like to see is disclosure, and then talk to the ETs and find out what they know about what's going on. Let's talk.
And it's somebody else was also making the observation just earlier on today that it seems that a lot of the traumatic experiences that people have been through were from some years ago, even if people are coming to terms with them still today. And so therefore we were looking at the possibility that there's been a change in the last, say, 10 or perhaps even 15 years of the way the ETs are interacting with experiences. And I don't know if you have any views on that or, from your clients.
People I talk with, they see there's a shift or a change. How much of that is that we're a different generation? The younger kids coming in now, they're not so upset about ETs. Just like, people used to be upset if blacks and whites intermarried. Now people are upset if gays and lesbians are married. And other people say, no, it doesn't bother my marriage. So maybe the same way it doesn't matter if one person marries an ET or has children with ET. I don't know how much of that is a shift in our perception or how much of that's a shift in a program. I just wish I knew what the program is.
Yes, I think that's where we'd all love to know this program, because, of course, it's not just one species that seems to be interacting with us. I don't know from your work with your clients whether you have any knowledge about the amount or the number of different species working with us, and also perhaps their different agendas.
Yeah, people I've talked with, some people have interacted with reptilians, with insectoids, with grays, tall, short grays. I talked with one young man from Colorado who interacted with haystacks, little haystacks. There have been robots, some people with what are called the Nordics, the blondes. And so we hear stories, and we hear some researchers talk about the Arcturian civilizations, the Pleiadian, various star systems. Native Americans, African tribes have talked about the Syrian, the Dogon tribe. There are many people who have said that the evidence is very impressive that the Dogon tribe knew about Sirius civilizations, the A and B stars, before European astronomers came there.
I think we only discovered, was it Sirius B? I can't remember which star we discovered, but only last century.
Yeah, whereas the Dogon people knew about that before. So there's a lot of historical evidence from a variety of researchers which suggests that ETs, what we call gods in those days, the gods came to the planet and populated, developing Homo erectus, the ape people, with their genes, so that we are both ET and planetary. We're all ET or all planetary, depending upon how you think about it, just like a person who could be both biracial as well as bicultural and so forth. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there are different civilizations interacting, whether they are separate, whether they are working together in concert. You know, it's like saying, well, those nurses and those social workers and those teachers and those coaches and those principals are all working together, it's forcing us to go through education. Maybe so.
And have you seen through your many years of work many changes in what experiencers are reporting to you?
Yes. For example, I was leading the group yesterday, an experiencers group here in this Congress, and I was reflecting back on what it was like in 1980, 1990, 2000. When we were talking to people, many people would come in and they would be nervous and worried, frightened, angry about their experiences. One example, though, a young woman named Jackie Blue. She came to our conference and she sat in the back. Didn't say anything the first year. The second year she came and she spoke to a few people about her ET encounter. The third year she stood up and she said that she had a coffee clutch, weekly meeting of housewives and neighbors. They'd come over and sit down and have tea or coffee and talk about their encounters. So she had evolved a lot. Yeah. They're talking about Travis Walton. I met him years ago. He was shook up at the time and didn't want to use hypnosis, but now he's an excellent spokesperson for not only his book and his experiences, but for the idea that it's okay to talk openly about the experiences. So more and more people, they still can feel pain, they can still suffer, just like people in military training or in education or in athletic, but it's a different kind of suffering. Just like a woman can give birth to a child and she's suffering, but if it goes well, she's pleased. And so a marathoner, she could run the race and suffer, but be pleased with her experience. So what I try to do is not minimize the suffering, because that's a person's right to suffer. But on the other hand, if I can, I want to give them some hope that their suffering has meaning or significance for them, some educational or personal or spiritual purpose to the suffering, not just to be miserable for 14 or 20 or 30 years without talking to somebody about it.
Have you seen many changes in what people are reporting specifically, sort of what's happening to them?
Not in the sense of diversity.
Right.
Some people say, did you have a scar behind your knee?
Yeah.
Or was it behind your shoulder?
Yes. Yeah.
And so
I guess I'm asking if there are any real changes in what people have been reporting to you over the period of time, and I guess that you've been, how many years is it that you've been working with, say, this contactee, abductee group?
Well, I started in the 60s, and since I was trained in hypnosis, I realized I could help people that way, as well as talking to them. So in 65, 66, I started then. But in terms of the question whether there's been a change in the diversity, it's increased.
Oh, that's interesting. So what would you say then is the expansion point? What have they expanded into?
It's a poor joke, but each person is unique, just like everybody else. So some people say, well, I had this kind of a sighting. One woman showed me the other day that she had a sighting of a flying saucer over a church steeple. I said, oh, beautiful. And it came down, and it did right angles, she said. I said, show me. So she took my hand. I said, so you get a blessing. And she was visibly struck emotionally by what was going on inside her, that it was not the frightening experience that she thought it ought to be. It was a blessing. sometimes when people graduate from high school, college, some people are graduating after many difficulties, and some are feeling like it was a breeze. So I like the educational model to say why some people feel like they're having a negative experience and why some people feel like they're having a positive experience. Now more and more people, when they learn other persons, especially at a conference like this, are describing their experiences, well then it's a feeling of relief. In the Army, some guys were angry about the kind of training he got. And then later they get out of the Army, I was in such and I was doing such and such. Now they're bragging about what they used to complain about. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to the naysayers after disclosure. My guess is that they'll say, I knew it all along.
So it sounds like you're expecting disclosure.
Yes. The reason I expect it is because of a variety of factors. If anybody's interested, there's a book called AD, After Disclosure, by Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel. They do a good job of showing the evidence leading up to current experiences, and then the factors that might be involved, all the way from photograph, near-death experience, or near a person who is dying and gives a deathbed confession, a military person or a governmental person, all the way up to if there are huge flights of silent craft over London and over New York and San Francisco at the same time. And everybody with their cameras will know it's happening. In my opinion, whether disclosure happens formally in the sense of a UN official or a government saying, yes, flying saucers exist, yes, ETs exist, whether it happens that way, or whether it just happens naturally that scientists say, oh yeah, we've been in contact. J. Allen Hynek, according to Ann Eller, his secretary, he knew back in the 50s that there was intelligence signals from Venus, but we don't hear this publicly. So we know that people know. we know that governmental officials know. We know that there's a lot of information. The only question is, why is it not being released? And I'll give you my take on that. In my opinion, it's not religious, it's not personal, it's not social, it's financial.
Of course.
Money talks and people listen. So that if the extraterrestrial presence is announced and the energy technology is announced, free energy, then there's no longer a need to cover up the ET presence, because now we have systems that can provide us with energy, so we don't have to fight over soil, we don't have to fight over oil, we don't have to fight over who's in charge with the financial system.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree that is the crux of the matter. To sort of come full circle and perhaps wrap things up.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Think that it's how do you personally see disclosure happening? I know we've just talked about one or two ways, but what's your personal take? Do you think that it's going to be a massive flyover, a global flyover, or?
Good question. I don't know. I asked my guides, and they say there's three things, and I don't know whether they're talking about 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or whether they're talking about 3 different sources. One possibility could be that the government officials say, yep, flying saucers exist. Another possibility is that the government says, what? And the science says, yes, we've discovered extraterrestrials. So that it could be from a scientific source, it could be from a governmental source, or it might be from religious leaders getting together and deciding to talk about where we come from and why. Or it might be a citizens group, and you might be interested in interviewing people like Stephen Bassett or other persons who, the citizens group, who are saying, we know, why don't you tell us what you know? If enough citizens decide that that's important to request and to receive, then perhaps government officials say, well, it's not up to us, we're government of the people, by the people, for the people, so they want us to know, well, let's look into it. Oh, wow, we found a vault, and the vault had a flying saucer and some records in it, and so maybe the disclosure will happen not only from scientific, political, but from citizen group pressure.
Are there any thoughts or any last things you'd like to share with us about the overall experience that you've had with experiences and being something of an experiencer yourself, to leave us on a last note?
I say thank you. Not only thank you to you for being a lovely and helpful interviewer, but also I say thank you to so many colleagues and so many people who have been willing to tell me about their experiences and to share with me. Thank you.
It is indeed an experience and a pleasure. Thank you very much. Here in Arizona. It's all right.
She's talking about